Good evening, church. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my testimony with you tonight. It's a little bit more emotional than I anticipated because it's the first time that I'm sharing my testimony fully with Anya and Matthias, my children. But I'm really thankful that they are here and that they love God and that you're here, that you came out to support me and to listen to me. And I hope that you're encouraged by my testimony. I grew up in a strongly atheistic, intellectual and performance-driven house. As a result of my household not walking with God, our family life was very unstable. This would go on to have a tremendous impact in my early adulthood. My father was a professor in engineering, my mother studied computer science, and my brother was a gifted mathematician. Then there was myself. Perhaps I'm captured best by my reception year teacher's note on my report card. It read, "Natasja is a very sociable child and she loves singing, but she struggles with the concept of numbers." This was unacceptable in my family, and so regardless, it was decided for me from a young age that I would one day also be an engineer. So indeed, at the end of school, I went and studied engineering, although I still didn't like math and I still wasn't any good at it. Towards the end of my first year of university, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. That was the start of the slow unraveling of my life and lack of identity. At the end of my first year in engineering, I flunked so badly that the university didn't want to allow me back, and my father had to pull serious strings in order to write me into another course he had picked for me, namely human resources. To be honest, I didn't even really know what HR was, but I was just relieved it would have less math. The catch was, I couldn't flunk a single subject or I would lose my place at uni, and on the merit of my marks, any other uni. I managed to pass my first year, but early in the following year, my father passed away. Realizing that I was studying a course I didn't enjoy, but also unable to quit as there was no other academic options left for me, I became overwhelmed with anxiety and doubt, and finally dropped out of university later that semester. The following 6 months was marred by chaos. I developed an eating disorder where I ended up weighing 103 pounds. I dated a string of guys, used drugs, self-harmed, was deeply depressed, and didn't have a clue what I wanted to do with my life. By the end of that year, I met my now husband, Bernd. I was in no state to consider dating someone, but the stark difference between Bernd and other men I had encountered up to that point in my life intrigued me. He had an unfamiliar, deep-seated joy of life and creation, and he was extremely uncomplicated. He was loyal to me in spite of my faults, yet he wasn't a pushover, and he seemed to have a relationship with God as though he was a real person. I didn't believe in God myself, but I believed that Bernd felt that God was a real father to him, and I now realize many years later that I experienced my first glimpses of God's love and character by His Spirit dwelling in Bernd. In time, Bernd became aware of my childhood trauma and depression and told my mum that she needed to take me to a psychologist. After a few sessions, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. It means that there was problems in the fundamental building blocks of my personality, how I see the world, how I process grief, conflict, relationships, etc. People with this disorder is known to be incapable of trust or forming long-term relationships. They're also very self-destructive, impulsive, and manipulative. BPD is not generally seen as a curable disorder. For the next 2 years, I was booked in and out of mental health clinics for people at high risk of committing suicide. Because Bernd and my mother supported me so well, I really wanted to get better. I tried my utmost to apply everything I learned from therapy to my daily life, but I experienced repeated setbacks followed by more time in clinics. After 2 years of this cycle, I was emotionally spent. I felt like a great burden to Bernd and my mum and realized there was no hope of me ever getting healed or leading a normal life. For the next 2 years, so I planned to commit suicide with a revolver my parents owned as soon as I was alone at home and locked myself in our bathroom with my deceased grandmother's Bible I had found on our library shelf. I didn't want to die, but if there was no God, it felt like the only option. I called out to God and asked that he would show me that he existed, and told him that I felt there was no hope for me otherwise, and I would have to kill myself. I decided to open the Bible at random, and whichever book I landed on, I would read front to back, which is something I'd never done before. The book I read was Proverbs, and that is where I met God. What I realized in my heart by the Spirit was this: bad things can happen to people in a sinful world, but nobody can make you a victim. We choose to be victims. I also had a part to play in where I ended up. I allowed abuse to define me and turn me into the type of person that doesn't fare very well when looking into the mirror of Proverbs. It was the first time in my life I was confronted with my own sin instead of being consumed by other people's shortcomings. God healed me from depression and all the other symptoms of BPD, and I haven't been on medication for 16 years now. After becoming a Christian, I decided to take a year out and dedicate it to God, and did an outreach year at a Baptist church where we did outreaches in Mozambique and our local schools and hospitals. At the end of that year, I went on to study music at a college where I was voted Student of the Year by my lecturers and was fortunate enough to be on the student council. During this time, some of my college friends and I also started up a Christian support group within college because it was such a challenging moral environment. Many students ended up joining our group for support, and a number of them also came to salvation. Since becoming a Christian, I've had to learn from my father how to navigate true love from worldly love. I've also walked a winding road in my faith, losing sight of God as my father and turning back to the familiar harsh master of work-based faith and laws, much like the Galatians, but also finding God time and time again as a faithful, loving father waiting for me on the doorstep of his house with open arms. A father who doesn't care how I perform in life. My shortcomings didn't vanish when I came to salvation, but now I have God as my Father. As it says in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9 to 11, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Thank you.